When we started this podcast a year and a half ago, there was one name at the top of my dream guest list, Keith Morrison. And even if you don't know Morrison's name, I'm guessing you may just know his voice.
Hello, I'm Keith Morrison. For the next few minutes, you're going to live in the stubborn puzzles of an old-fashioned mystery.
For over 30 years, that voice has been at the center of NBC's Dateline, which, in a way, is the original true crime show. Now Morrison and Dateline have moved into podcasting, and his most recent series about a pair of drifters who commit a double homicide in a quiet farming community is called Murder in the Moonlight. I only had Keith for a short while, but there was a lot that I wanted to ask him about. How he picks the stories that he works on, what it's like to spend 30 years interviewing murderers, and whether the death of his stepson, actor Matthew Perry, has impacted the way that he approaches his job. I got to a lot of those questions and much more. I'm Kathleen Goldhar, and this is Crime Story. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
You were our big get when the show started a year and a half ago, so I feel like now I could just stop, but it's a really nice pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've never felt like a big get before. Wow, that's
Oh, you are.
cool.
You are. You are for us journalism crime junkies. You're the big get.
Thank you.
Well, it's a real pleasure. Let's jump into it. So in your new podcast, Murder in the Moonlight, it's about a murder that happened in 2006, and you guys covered it for Dateline in 2010. What was it about this story that made you feel like it was worth coming back to now?
I'd been thinking about this story off and on for years.
Really?
Partly because the curious characters who crossed paths at a moment in time when they're all looking for patterns and there was no pattern, and coincidence played such a role, and the MacGuffin played such a role. The
MacGuffin is such a cool thing. Can you just tell those who don't know what a MacGuffin is, what it is? Well,
it's some little incident or usually some physical article, which seems insignificant, but eventually it changes the whole course of events and turns the plot on its head. And that's what happened here.
Yeah, so can you tell me about that? Give us a sort of a nice...
Well, I guess, and it doesn't matter, I can give it away now, right? I can say what it is.
You can give it away. I mean, you gave it away in 2010, but yes, please give it away.
That is true.
And the podcast is all out there, so everybody can go back and listen, yeah.
Well, the investigation, this was a terrible murder that occurred in a farmhouse in rural Nebraska, where two revered people in the farm community, a husband and wife, are lying in their bed at night, and they're awakened by some intruders. Both of them are killed. The police arrive later, and they're trying to figure out what happened. They find a shadow on the wall behind, a blood spatter shadow, if I can put it that way, where the blood had obviously gone by a second person and hit the wall and left the shape of a person. And so they assumed that there were two people at least involved in this killing. And they also thought this is the kind of killing a rage killing that somebody who is a member of the family may have committed. And they landed upon pardon my caller. They landed upon a cousin of the family who had some issues with the couple who was killed. And he was also a little bit, slow is an unfair word, but he wasn't the brightest bulb, as he admitted himself. So the police brought him in for questioning, and they kept him questioning him for hours and hours and hours.
I didn't have anything to do with this.
You did.
I did not.
You did.
I did not, Bill.
You did.
Oh, I did.
I'm sorry. You did.
And finally, he admitted he did it. He confessed.
And you took that gun back to your Uncle William and Aunt Charlotte's house, right? Right or wrong? Come on, man. Right.
And then he pulled in a cousin of his as the second person there. And that's the theory that the police went on. They got stuck on that theory. But in the course of looking around the house, they didn't find very much evidence. And then 2 or 3 days later, a young policewoman discovered under a cupboard in the kitchen a gold ring, like a wedding band. And it had initials inside. Both of the people, pardon me, good Lord. This isn't working out too well, is it? I hope you can edit this.
I think we're going to keep it. I kind of like it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, don't worry.
Where was I? So yes, under the cupboard, they found this little wedding ring with the initials of two people on it. Can't remember them, but that was so-and-so loves so-and-so.
Yeah.
And the initials of the jeweler where it was made. AAJ. Good Lord, hang on a second.
Do you need a glass of water?
Jesus.
I'm changing my mind about you being such a great get.
Yeah. Please do. Holy Hannah. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Don't worry.
So they find this gold ring, and they think it means nothing. They think it belonged probably to one of the investigators. It accidentally got dropped. But one of the investigators on the case, a young woman, thought, I got to figure out more. This has something to do with this case. And so she researched AAJ, which apparently was the jeweler that made the wedding band, and it was a place in Buffalo, New York, 400 miles, 500 miles away. And she contacted AAJ just to say she had found this ring with these initials on it. Could they be helpful? And the woman at AAJ said, well, we're shutting down the company. We're leaving. It's all over. But she agreed when she heard the word homicide that she'd better have a look at the records and see if she could find anything. And spent 3 days looking through these, boxes and boxes of files of wedding bands that had been sent out with initials on them. And finally, she found it. And it had been sold in a place that was also hundreds of miles away from where the crime occurred, at a Walmart. And so the detectives went to that Walmart, and they figured out who it got sold to. And it was sold to a farmer who was no longer with the woman. And so he took off the wedding band, but he threw it into the glove compartment of his old red truck. And then his truck was stolen. It's a long, shaggy dog tail, as you can see.
Yeah, yeah.
But eventually they figured out that the ring was in the truck, and they needed to find out who stole the truck, and then they'd get an idea of maybe who left the ring at the crime scene. And that didn't take too long. They discovered that 2 young people had stolen the truck. They had been arrested for that crime, and that's what led them to the actual
The murderers.
Killers. Then they had to get the people who they'd already put in prison and charged with murder. They had to get them out, and that was a whole process too.
That, as it always is. Prosecutors don't like to admit that they're wrong.
They do not, no. And the entire town, of course, believed that these 2 who had been arrested were guilty. But then in the end, the ne'er-do-well kids who had committed the crime, it was very much like the killers in Cold Blood. It was just a random killing in the middle of nowhere. They were high. They were having an adventure. They decided to go in and rob a farmhouse. They'd stolen a gun somewhere. They saw this couple. They freaked out. One of them shot them. The other one may have fired one shot as well. And then they ran away, and she dropped the ring as she was running.
And so the ring is the MacGuffin.
The ring is the MacGuffin. But the story itself was interesting. It had all kinds of elements. First of all, the similarity to the novel in Cold, the novel, the true crime, the original true crime not novel in Cold Blood was remarkable. And that interested me about the story, and one of the reasons it stayed in my mind. The MacGuffin was interesting. And the young woman who was the female couple of the killer, who was sent away for life just like he was, turned down an opportunity to pin the blame on the 2 guys who she knew were innocent. Had she done that, they would be in prison, maybe even on death row, and she would have only served maybe 10, 15 years in jail and be let out. So I went to interview her. Do you kick yourself about that sometimes?
No.
Why not?
Because when I wake up in the morning, I can look at myself and be okay. They're where they should be on the streets because they didn't do anything. And I'm where I should be,
I described it in the television show like talking to a kindergarten teacher. She was she had matured considerably. She took on responsible roles in the prison, and she had accepted that would be her life from now on. And she was an interesting young woman, but did a terrible, terrible thing. But at one point along the way, she sort of stood up and became a human being.
You've done so many of these stories. And one of the things that I always find that has drawn me to true crime, quote unquote, isn't the sensational aspect of it, but it is sort of the nuance of human nature. And I found like you found that in this young woman. You know, as a young woman, she was astray and followed and made a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
But as she matured in a place that maybe supported her in a way that maybe she couldn't have gotten the supports at home or wherever she was sort of flying around outside, sort of helped her to develop into a person, which always then makes me think like, criminals are not always just these black and white, evil or good, right? That's what I always find the most interesting about these sort of stories.
Exactly, and they're all very human stories in one way or another. And you know, people like to think in terms of black and white or good guys and bad guys, and binary stories where the good guys are chasing after the bad guys. In this particular story, one of the good guys turned out to be a bad guy because he was faking evidence. And the crime lab ran into trouble. And, lots of the people who were supposed to be keeping the law turned out to be not very good at doing that and may have broken the law. But, the crime was horrible. And so it's understandable that would be the thing that people focus on. However, it was, that 1 year in those two kids' lives, maybe 6-month period, was when they were high and crazy all the time. And so they did that high and crazy, terrible thing. But otherwise, they were just kind of regular people.
I liked your connection to In Cold Blood. Obviously, that was one of the first books I also kind of remember reading. And I mean, I find it fascinating that, he wrote that, Truman Capote wrote that book. It became this massive hit. And I feel like that's the moment, and you mentioned this in the podcast too, that sort of true crime, the idea of true crime in the genre blows up. How have you seen the evolution of true crime over the years that you've been covering it?
Well, for one thing, I was shocked that it became a big thing. And I did not want to join that party. I was not keen on covering true crime. I wasn't covering crime at all in my career up until that point. Somebody said, "Will you do this story about the murder of so-and-so?" And I thought, really? I don't think I want to do that kind of thing. But when you get into it and you see the human beings involved and the ways character influences what happens, the way what happens then has a boomerang effect on the characters of those involved, how they react to moments of great stress, who is a psychopath and who is just a regular person getting themselves involved in something. There are just so many fascinating, interesting aspects of the human beings involved, and that's what interests me. Dennis Murphy, one of the other correspondents on the show, loves to say it's not about the murder, it's about the marriage.
That's great.
And that's our shows, yes, are about the ancillary events around the central thing.
Why do you think we can't get enough of it?
Well, it might be some sort of natural evolutionary type interest in the dark side. Maybe human beings have to know what's out there. What can happen, what does happen sometimes. But what surprises me is that a lot of people seem to people will tell me that they fall asleep to Dateline or to the podcast, that they find it sort of soothing to listen to these stories. That always surprises me.
I hear that too. I always wonder. But I think it's the nature. I think podcasts put people to sleep because it stops you from thinking and you can put your brain somewhere else. I don't know if it's the content.
Could be.
Plus your famous voice.
I don't know, but it could be something like that. I don't know. And when I get into the stories, I just get fascinated by them. And I can't, I want more time all the time to explore the character more.
Even all these years later, you still find that you can tap into the story.
Yes. And frequently it'll be, because, you get lazy in old age and I'm not digging them up anymore, and I'm waiting for somebody to call me up and ask if I'll do such and such. And I say, "Oh, sure, I guess so." And it sounds, when I hear it described, it sounds like, why would anybody be interested in that? But then I look into it, and then I get interested, and I can't let it go.
I know in 2019 you said something on GQ where you talked about being surprised that people will sit down and talk to you about the most painful things in their lives.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that. Why do you think that people are willing? And I have to tell you one as an aside, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, but Americans are much more willing to talk than Canadians.
Oh, yes, much more. And you know, Suzanne and I noticed that from the moment we moved into this country. That was one of the first surprises we had. You know, you'll meet a total stranger and you're intimate friends within 5 minutes talking about how big is your mortgage? And how many girlfriends do you have on the side? All that sort of nonsense. It's quite strange. I mean, the cultural difference was far more pronounced than I thought it would be.
Why do you think both? And we know Canadians will sit down and talk and bare their souls when they're going through the worst of
Sure,
things.
yeah.
What do you think it is about us, or why do you think that is so possible?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I'm surprised sometimes that people will do this, as I've said before, especially when they know that millions of people will listen or watch. But there is something cathartic about it. Frequently, after a long, and these are long conversations, hours long, and I'll often be quite surprised that they will have been as personal and as vulnerable when they know people are going to be watching it. But at the end of it, it seems to make people feel better quite frequently.
Did things shift for you after the death of Matthew Perry? And you sort of ended up on the other side of it?
Yeah, it's and that one is you see it from the other side, and there are tons of things I'd love to say, and probably would be sitting down and burying my soul about it, but simply because of who he was, it becomes a more tricky situation.
And I'm not asking for that. I was just curious,
no, I understand
like
that.
as the person. But how did it shift for you as the interviewer, as the person asking those questions? Like, is it the difference between empathy and sympathy? Like, was there an ability to sort of, as a human being, understand it, and then when you're in it, you really understand it?
Yes, I think you put your finger on it, because you can sympathize with somebody and say, "Oh, you poor thing," but you're not really listening, and you're not really kind of drilling in on what they're telling you. And when you have empathy with somebody, you are, you actually are joining whatever it is they're saying. I think that's how you get into the nub of the story as well, that you have to do that sort of thing.
Has it changed the way you interview people?
It's yes. In a word, it has. In some ways, it makes you lazy because you can go on and on and on and keep talking for as long as you need to talk. And, the partners I work with on these stories frequently will say, well, no, keep going. I want more on this. I want more on that. So you wind up talking even longer than you intended to. But so there is there's a laziness to it in some ways. You're not sort of structuring an interview the way Barbara Frum and I would have done on the Journal many years ago. But then you can't bring people understanding unless you understand it pretty thoroughly yourself. And so that's what we try to do.
A couple of years ago, I worked on a podcast about Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. It was called The Madness of Two. Lori and Chad were charged with killing both of her children, her ex-husband, and his wife. And it was one of the strangest stories that I've ever worked on. So when I saw that Keith had recently sat down with Lori for a jailhouse interview, I had to ask him about it. Can we talk a little bit about Lori Vallow?
Sure.
How did you get that interview?
We'd worked on it for a while. My partners and I, but she wanted to talk to me apparently, and I had spoken to her along the way a time or two, and she had that same kind of attitude, that sort of challenging, in-your-face sarcasm combined with flirtatiousness, weirdness. It just weird. You're the most hated mom in America.
I heard that. And We all know what the media does, and they exaggerate everything, and they make stuff up, and they twist things around. So I don't know how it became what it is today.
Are you misunderstood?
Absolutely.
Misunderstood how? I mean, how did they get you wrong?
In every way. I mean, how do you know a person if you never talk to them in 5 years? How do you know anything about them? How do you know anything about their life?
Wow. And what were your impressions?
Of Lori Vallow?
Yeah.
Well, the legal system thinks that she is sane enough to be tried for murder. And she's not sane. I mean, she's clearly delusional.
I recognized him spiritually. He recognized me spiritually, that we had known each other for eternities.
But she is also sneakily delusional. You wonder how much of what she says she actually believes and how much is just all put on, because her attitude is, I'm putting this on, I'm having you on. But then really maybe not. So it keeps you guessing. And I'm still not sure. I mean, does she actually believe this stuff or not?
Yeah. What do you think it is about her story? Is it the mother killing thing that makes people just so fascinated with her?
The combination of her audaciousness and probably her kind of, I don't know, I guess it's an underhanded sex appeal in some strange way, and what she did, and the kind of the two of them together, and the claims she made about living all these different lives. And it was a new one the other day when I said, so which was your first life? She said, well, I was the daughter of Methuselah. Undoubtedly the first daughter of Methuselah, right?
Everybody always, if they look back in their past lives, is always somebody very special. Nobody shoveled shit.
Lots of special people. Right.
Is there a story that you feel you'd still like to get, an interview you'd still like to get that you're still kind of hoping for?
Well, that was one I'd wanted for a long time. I'd love to talk to Chad too, frankly, but he's on death row, and that ain't going to happen.
And lastly, I know you got to go. Your million people are phoning you. When you think back on your career, can you give me a couple that you feel like you're most proud of?
Oh boy, I worked at the CBC for a number of years, as you may know, and I absolutely loved that. Working on the Journal was a highlight for sure. Sitting beside Barbara Fromm and getting a chance to talk to remember doing Brian Mulroney when he first took over as Prime Minister, and we had him live on television, and that's a high that you don't get very often. But where it comes to Dateline, I did a story back just before the turn of the century about a Vietnam veteran who had carried around a little photograph in his wallet for years and years and years, and the photograph was of a little girl being held in the arms of a young soldier, a North Vietnamese soldier. And it turned out that he had been on maneuvers early on in his assignment to Vietnam, stopped in the middle of a clearing to light a cigarette and saw some movement to one side, and it was a North Vietnamese soldier. And he kind of sneakily moved his rifle around and fired and killed the guy. Fell down on the ground. It was his first kill. And other soldiers came and sort of stripped the body, and then he went over and had a look, and he saw this photograph which had fallen out of the guy's pocket. And he put it in his own wallet, and he carried it around. But it became the source of his PTSD. He had survivor's guilt. He had moral guilt about what he had to do during the war. And he did it willingly and proudly in a way, but he still was a human being, and he couldn't get it out of his head. He kept trying in very different ways to do so. So eventually he decided he had to find her, and he put an ad in a newspaper in Hanoi. If anybody knew this young woman, get in touch with the ambassador. And somebody did. They, it had been used to wrap fish or something. It was sent out to the villages, and somebody saw the photograph. So they identified the person who was then, going on 40, and he went back to see her, and I went with him.
The day before he is to meet the girl, now woman, in the photo, Rich is almost beyond nervous.
I'd almost rather face combat again than face this girl.
The meeting between the two of them, with all these people in the background, a lot of old soldiers from the other side surrounding us, and kind of everybody having their cathartic moment was one of the most amazing moments of my life.
Tell her this is the photo that I took from her father's wallet today that I shot and killed her, and that I'm returning.
That probably is the one that stands out the most for me.
You know, I feel like there's two kind of journalists in the world. There's like the issue-based, and then there's the storyteller and the human, like looking. And I feel like that's obviously the direction that appeals to you. You get sucked into the human story.
Yeah, having a genuine moment like that from one individual, either an important one or one who may, on the scheme of things, not seem that important, but getting that kind of honest, cathartic moment from somebody. And being able to tell a story about it there's nothing like it.
No, I agree. And do you think you're coming back to Canada ever? You're getting sick of everything that's going on there?
Oh, man, oh, man, oh, man. Well, these are perilous times we live in.
Perilous, but perilous for the media. And I know, Dateline sort of has, a very established place, and I guess it kind of does have its own place in it. Like, it's not quite the mainstream media in the same way, but are you feeling any backlash? Like, do you ever get that from the work you're doing? Or how is it affecting you?
No, we are apolitical. We don't get involved in politics at all. And, partly because you want to appeal to the widest possible audience, and this is a very divided country. And so we just make it a point. We just don't do politics and don't even get close to it. And frankly, I don't mind. I used to cover politics, and it was exciting at the time, but oh boy, I wouldn't want to cover it now.
No.
Just there's no winning,
How do you make sure you're okay? You have to talk to all these people who talk about the worst in their life.
Somehow, weirdly, telling stories like this make me feel more grounded than perhaps I otherwise might. It's odd, but there you are.
I think that's what keeps us all going in this profession.
Yeah.
Well, it was such a pleasure to meet you. I know you're
a delight
rushing
to
off.
talk to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It really is lovely.
Forgive my choking and hacking.
Oh, please.
Creating issues
it's nice
at the
to
beginning.
know we're all human. Totally. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Crime Story from CBC Podcasts. We release a new episode every Monday, so please remember to follow the show in your podcast app. You can get our next episode a week early on CBC Podcasts' YouTube channel or by subscribing to CBC Podcasts' True Crime channel on Apple Podcasts. In addition to early access, subscribers to our True Crime channel also listen ad-free. Crime Story is hosted by me, Kathleen Goldhar. Our producers are Nikki Manfredi and Mitchell Stewart. Sound design by Julian Uzielli and Mitchell Stewart. Our senior producer is Jeff Turner, our video producer is Evan Agard, and our YouTube producer is John Lee. Media sourced from NBC. Executive producers are Cecil Fernandez and Chris Oak. Tanya Springer is the senior manager of CBC Podcasts, and Arif Noorani is the director of CBC Podcasts.